Welcome to our conversation today on exploring the impact of AI on student belonging and student connection. So we are recording this webinar, so we'll send it out afterward so that everyone has a copy. We'll, and you obviously feel free to share it. Danielle just mentioned the chat is on. So if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I believe when you open the chat, it will default to just posting to the host and the moderators. So, we love for everybody to see the conversation that's happening. So if you're willing and able to switch that to everybody, that way when you post your questions or your comments, all the members of the webinar will see them. And we do hope this is very interactive. This is very much meant to be a conversation today. So please chime in with your questions, your comments, any personal experiences that you have, and if there are things that you really want us to touch on, please put them in there as well. I'm particularly excited about the conversation today because if you've attended any conference or read any publication, AI is obviously everywhere in the conversation in education since the arrival of generative AI. I think a lot of the stuff that I have been seeing talks about the implications of AI on teaching and learning, specifically in the classroom, and the ethics of that, incorporating it or not incorporating it. I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit of that today, but we're really going to look at it from a slightly different angle, which is thinking about how AI is going to impact and influence human interaction in the education space, and where there is potential to either enhance or potentially take away from those interactions, and what some of the implications of that might be. So I'm really excited about that. Before I jump in to have our panelists introduce themselves, we would also love to know who we have out there. So if you don't mind taking a minute just to introduce yourself in the chat, it would be great to know who you are, what your role is, where you're from. And then again, if there's anything in particular that you would like to know or talk about today, that would be wonderful. You can also, if you want, I think we have some live tweeting going on during the session today, so feel free to join us in that conversation on Twitter as well. So let's introduce ourselves. So first I want to let everyone know that my colleague Danielle, who we really should represent on this slide, is here today. She's really going to help keep us all on track. She's keeping an eye on the chat, so she'll interact with you there, but also make sure that as your questions come in, we see them, we're aware of them, and we'll address them during the conversation. So keep that content coming. I am Katie Kapler. I am the co-founder and CEO of Inscribe. If you guys aren't familiar with our platform, we are a virtual community solution that helps build digital spaces for students to connect with peers, faculty, and staff anytime they need help, want advice, or just want to connect with another human being. So we're very much about human connection, powered by technology. So as you might imagine, this is a particularly timely and relevant conversation for me today. Andrew, do you mind introducing yourself to our participants?
Sure. My name is Andrew Feldstein. I'm Assistant Provost for Teaching Innovation and Learning Technologies here at Fort Hays State University. And one of my main functions is to make sure that our teaching and learning ecosystem is helping our students engage with the learning process.
Awesome. And Daniel?
Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Robinson. I'm the Director and Academic Unit Head for the Adult Degree Program at James Madison University. I've been in this role for just over a year now, but I've been at James Madison for almost 15 years. And our program is the degree completion wing of the university for adults who have some college credit but no degree. So it's a primarily online program. We have about 500 students, and we're very happy that that's robust and growing. So we're keenly interested and aware of the need to engage our students in lots of different ways, including through technology and ways that we can hopefully leverage some new tools and be careful and thoughtful critics of tools that might detract from that sense of belonging and ways to connect. I've been involved in a variety of technology and education initiatives and projects throughout my career, including things like 3D printing. I used to co-chair a conference on teaching and learning with technology, which was a great experience for me. So I come to that with some experience, not particularly in AI, generative AI, as most of us don't have much of experience in that yet, but keen to figure out what comes next.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to have these folks here with us today. I would say even in the preparation, the conversations that we had, I feel like I learned so much and loved all the insights that you guys brought. So I'm really excited for our discussion. I think I have another slide on Inscribe, but we already talked about this, so we're going to get right into the thick of it. So why don't we start with a little foundational groundwork? I think it's helpful to just sort of open the conversation with like kind of level setting at your institutions. I don't know, how would you say, like, when the generative AI first appeared, or now as it's evolved, I would say over the past almost year, 9 months to a year, what's been the response on your campus, and how have various groups kind of thought about or reacted to its arrival? I'll toss it to you first, Andrew.
Sure. And basically, I know we're going to be talking a lot about how the impact of generative AI on human relationships, but I'll start with sort of a metaphor on our relationship to generative AI. And in a way, it's sort of been all over the place. There have been some folks have been pretty tentative about it, and, saying, I'm not sure who this new generative AI is, and maybe I want to get to know them, maybe I don't. And so dipping their toes in, and they're saying, okay, what can this do? And asking other people what it can do, playing around with it a little bit. There are other people that are considerably more excited about it and think that it's going to be a real boon to their workflow and their processes, and they're really sort of jumping in with both feet. There's also the group that thinks that looks at generative AI and said, there's trouble. And so they started thinking about, I don't think I want to get involved with it. I don't want my kids involved with it. I don't want my friends involved with it. We're not invited for dinner. And of course, taking that out of the metaphor for a minute, that represents the group that on campus in particular that's looking at this potentially as a boon to a whole new way for students to break the academic integrity barrier. But again, it's all over the place, and so, which makes sense because it's affecting everything, and people are going to be reacting in different ways.
Yeah. So a wide spectrum. Has that been a similar experience for you, Daniel? What would you say?
Yeah, I think that's fairly true. With the fairly big institution, it's a bureaucracy in the good ways and bad ways. So things take time, which can be useful because you don't find yourself, burning down systems that work really well in favor of, something new and flashy that's come along, but also a little bit slow on the uptake. So I echo just what Andrew said, and I know for a fact now that our institution is taking up some kind of hard looks to create some policies around generative AI, how students could use it, to repeat Andrew, ways to I like how you put it, break the academic integrity barrier. Very, very diplomatic way to say it. I think that's of the utmost concern on just a straightforward, there's a problem and we need a solution to it, or a potential problem and we should have a solution to it. I will just say in my firsthand experience with colleagues, some are very, very keen to stay away from it. They think it's going to be really problematic for their students and their classes, and others who said, okay, well, this might change my work. I might be able to use this in a really interesting way to make my work habits different, better, more efficient, more productive, make my research go faster and more smoothly, which is interesting because there have been also instances of both where, like, this is good for me, but I'm really concerned about my students having access to it. and partly that seems slightly hypocritical, but I can also relate to it in that by the time you're a faculty member or a seasoned professional, you've integrated certain norms and practices around ethical ways to use and generate information. And, you know, your average undergraduate just hasn't had that experience yet. So this is kind of thrown in the wash while you're also trying to build up those competencies through your academic practice. So it's been kind of all over the place. I'll just share anecdotally. It took a couple of weeks before my desk had the first faculty member say, look, I've got this thing from a student and I think it was generated with AI. And indeed it was, and, you know, like steps had to be taken, and it was in some ways straightforwardly just a plagiarism issue. But the question becomes for me, the subtlety between students using a generative AI program to help them generate an outline and ideas and sketch and things like that. And it's a creative process versus I'm gonna use it to you know, generate whole cloth my academic work, and how they understand the distinctions between those things. We don't have a cogent way to talk about that, I think, as an industry just yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's extremely true. And I was sort of reflecting as you talked about the reactions across both of your institutions. I feel like I personally had all of those reactions myself when it came out. And what's interesting is we all know AI is not new. I was reminded in a session I went to the other day that like Clippy, the annoying little paperclip that used to appear, essentially was like the origin of this kind of AI. But there is something about the human conversational nature of it that has felt very different, and certainly very different to me. Everything from, well, maybe this isn't really real, to, oh, wow, there's all these different ways we can use it, to like a bit of an existential crisis around what this means, you know, and for the first time, I feel like I wasn't totally able to wrap my head around all the implications and opportunities that this kind of technology would bring. So it's also left me feeling a little like open-ended from that perspective. And there are certainly both pros and cons to what a technology like this can bring to us. So, you know, and you touched on some of those, especially in the classroom context or in the context of cheating or plagiarism or content generation, including the ability for this type of technology to help us ideate and be creative and give us kind of a head start. What also do you see maybe as, I guess we have here the risks, but also maybe some of the opportunities in human interaction in education, like as generative AI becomes baked into a lot of the technologies and tools that we're using? What are some of the implications that you think we'll see from that? And who wants to jump in first?
Oh, I can jump. I mean, it's interesting because, again, what some people see as risks, others see as opportunities.
Right.
And so as we look at this, one of the first things that really concerns me in this space is that while there's a whole group of people that are really, really excited about the opportunity to interact with generative AI, because it can be really handy. You can write half of a sentence and ask it to finish it for you, and it will finish it very nicely, and sometimes relevantly, and sometimes better than you might have been able to express yourself to start with. But one of the things I see as a potential risk, with the enthusiasm that some have for the fact, okay, this is my new best friend, my new personal assistant, I can ask it questions and it can answer them for me. But my concern here is getting to a point where that's where you're going for input. Because at the end of the day, all you're going to be getting out of generative AI is recycled information. It's not coming up with anything new. So yes, it's handy. There's way less friction having yourself talk to an always on generative AI platform than it is to talk to a human being about something. But you're going to find that the AI is always going to be helpful. It's always going to answer your questions. And so it really becomes easy. What it's not going to do is in certain situations, it's not going to challenge your perceptions. It's not going to say, why did you ask this question? It's not going to say, that's interesting, but did you think of this? And
Right.
so one of the risks here is that we're not going to be moving forward with our thinking. We're going to be recycling old thoughts. And one thing I wanted to talk about just for a second, because I was thinking about this, where have we heard this discussion before? And I went back, there was a 2012 op-ed piece in the New York Times by Sherry Turkle. It was titled, "The Flight from Conversation." And one of the quotes from this, again, 2012 article, which would have been back, what's that, 11 years ago, says, "We expect more from technology and less from one another, and seem increasingly drawn to technologies that provide the illusion of companionship without the demands of relationship." And I think that this is a very apt comment, and certainly apt to where we're going. And maybe in many ways, there's even more insidious somehow than the downsides of having your phone always on, because this is going less to processes and more to thinking and cognitive pieces.
Yeah, what would you add to that, Daniel? I was going to add a few things, but I'm going to let you chime in first.
Sure. I think that was very well put. And I would say just maybe a layer to that would be the undervaluing of the academic process itself. So by challenging that friction that Andrew was talking about, which I think is a wonderful way to put that criticality, critical thinking, the kind of incisive investigation of ideas that is really at the core of every academic practice, isn't practiced in the same way. It isn't practiced rigorously enough. And by that, isn't seen as something that is as important as being able to call up information or seemingly new ways of stating fact or ideas at an instant. And I think that's really troubling, because then when you're in a situation, if we're thinking about students, when students are in a situation where they are challenged in a much deeper and more rich way, will they have the skills that they need? And what thinking through carefully what cost there would be to having this prevalence of computer interaction rather than human interaction, when human interaction becomes vital or necessary, or even just the only option, or when you're challenged. So as faculty, as administrators, how do we pay that cost as we go, rather than leave students in a less advantageous position to be able to then do what's necessary? Because my feeling, a lot of folks that I've interacted with and things that I've read that are kind of boosters of generative AI treat it like the greatest calculator that they've ever seen. It can just do things really quickly that would take me kind of tedious time to do. That, why should I spend my time?
Right.
And I think that's fair enough in some way, but then what then is so important that you need to spend your time on it? And do you have the skills? Are you building the capacities to then do that if this AI can take care of this other tedious stuff? Or are you losing something that you would build through that kind of rote tedium that you're outsourcing to a generative AI system?
Yeah.
And that to me is where the complicated questions really sit for the risks.
But that's an interesting point, Daniel, because what's tedious, I mean, there's two types of tedious. Well, maybe there's lots of types of tedious. But there's tedious that, okay, this is just this rote thing that just needs to be done, doesn't require any thought, and that dig in a ditch. But what's different, sometimes we think thinking is tedious. And thinking is tedious, but that's how we got where we are as human beings. We think through problems, we think critically about things, and we solve problems that way. All that's going to happen if you have that, if you're trying to come up with something new and you're talking to artificial intelligence, generative AI, all that you get back is derivative. The knowledge that they have there is things that have already been done, thoughts that have already been thought, solutions that have already been generated, and what you're getting are probably the most popular of those things, or the things that are reinforced most often. But that doesn't help us at all when it comes to novel, innovative solutions to problems that we're going to be having today, because in fact, as time goes on, the problems get different. The problems are different, and old solutions don't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. And I think one of the things I liked about what both of you were saying was this idea that you're sort of, by leaning on AI, there's a certain set of skills that you build by interacting with other human beings, like critical thinking, the ability for someone to challenge you and respond to that. Just the simple ability to ask a question and to seek knowledge and to be comfortable interacting with other people. And so if we're allowing you to hide away from the development of those skills because it's easy, what happens when you get out into the real world? I mean, society is built and needs people who have these skill sets, which are a subset of what students are really learning in higher education and building and growing as they mature. So to sort of extend this, maybe look at it from the flip side, one thing someone has said to me when I mentioned this is like, well, why not just have the AI pretend to be a human? So if you think you're interacting with a human, maybe you'll be actually building some of these skills anyway. So I'm curious your opinion on that. And as it's of course particularly relevant to me as a creator of technology solutions, what's your sense of the obligation of providers or practitioners to let you know when you're talking to something? Or is it a something or is it a someone? Does that need to be made clear, or are there times when it's okay to hide that behind? Dan, jump in.
Yeah, I'll just tip my hand a little bit from the jump here and just say I find it a little bit like existentially terrifying to think that I could have some interaction with a piece of technology and not be and be pretty easily fooled that it's not a human being. I think that's a wonder and a terror simultaneously. Yeah. And I think from a moral and ethical standpoint that yes, if you are a person who leverages technology in some profound way to interact with human beings, yes, indeed, you are obligated to be transparent about that. I will share a little bit just about my institution, James Madison University. We have this really wonderful program that came out of a quality enhancement plan just over a decade ago, I think, called the Ethical Reasoning in Action. There's this framework called the 8 key questions, and all first-year students go through a process of interacting with some very unclear, non-trivial ethical question that they have to spend some time grappling with. And it's been, one that I helped facilitate in the past was, should resident hall directors have access to Narcan? Is that an okay responsibility? Is it simply like, that's not a clear question. It doesn't have a very simple answer. And this year, their scenario that's being shared is AI care. So a mental health care system that is AI that emulates a human therapist to meet the demand of professionals in the mental health industry that currently, doesn't really exist enough. And some interesting ethical questions there. which is fascinating. And I can't wait to hear what first year students have to say about that and how they think about it, which will likely differ from how I think about it. But yes, I think it is, to me, quite clear and cut and dry. I'd be interested, Andrew or Katie, if you have, I can imagine that there would be scenarios where it'd actually be really beneficial in certain situations for that opacity to remain, and for that person who is interacting to think. The benefit is to think that they're interacting with a human. But I can only imagine, if this were a research study and you were using human subjects and they were going to be interacting with this thing, like that would be, the protocol would have to be very robust to protect the person's sense of well-being against that. It just feels kind of viscerally like I feel cautious about that.
Yeah, like your physical reaction immediately is like, no way. That's
hard.
I'm curious, as we were talking, I'll throw it out to the audience as well. We'd love to hear your opinions on this, and like, is there a really good argument to say it's okay to hide that? I'm not sure I have that argument, but Andrew, what would you want to add here?
Well, a lot of this comes down to expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, there are situations in which if we are going online to the little help button on the store that we just purchased something from and are asking a question, we can pretty well expect that it's not going to be a human being that you're going to be talking with first. You may have to get to a human being, but the expectation there is that to scale these types of customer service situations, that there's a lot of artificial intelligence being used to funnel the questions in the right direction, that sort of thing. And so, I wouldn't feel surprised or betrayed to learn that I was talking to a chatbot in one of those situations. However, if the situation was set up where my expectation and the expectation of the context in which I was in was that I was talking to a human being and I wasn't, that would be problematic.
Yes.
I think back the situation a few years ago, I think it was at Georgia Tech, where they created one of the first chatbots for a graduate school course, and this particular, they had anthropomorphized this chatbot as a female who was a graduate assistant who was helping people in the course. And when it was first reported on, I thought it was, well, that's really neat that nobody was able to know, nobody knew the difference between the humans that were TAs in the course and this bot that was a TA in the course, except for the fact that the bot answered their questions much more efficiently and was always there and friendly. And then there were situations where I guess a couple of the students in the class asked the bot out on a date. And if you think about,
that's your TA on a date anyway.
I'm sure it would have been an uncomfortable date. But if you think about it in that context, back then I said, oh, that's really neat. But now as I think about it, it's like there should be a duty to explain to people that whether you're talking to a human being or whether you're not talking to a human being.
Yes. Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because I was in preparation for this, I was trying to find any data about, so Jill Watson was that AI teaching assistant that they developed. I was trying to find any data around what the students' real reaction was once they found out that it was a bot. And so the articles had, bits and pieces of students were surprised and astounded and couldn't believe it. But I wonder if any of them were mad or put off or embarrassed that they hadn't really understood that this was technology. And when I dug a little bit deeper, it was clear that the bot assistant was only allowed to answer certain questions. So she was very good about answering tactical questions where the answer was very clear, which was about 40% of what came in, so a big percentage. But the rest were kept for the humans because they required higher level thinking. They were more subjective in nature. They included things like emotions and how am I feeling. So I thought that was really interesting. And for our work, you know, in our communities that we build, so much of the conversations are really around building personal relationship, like being vulnerable to a group of people, having them step in and support you, giving you advice on how to, you know, persist when times get tough. And I just have to believe that although you probably could develop technology that would do that and participate in that way, there's something, it's like catfishing somebody, right? You're like allowing somebody to build a personal relationship with an entity that isn't actually there on the back end and will not go with them when they leave their education or move forward or anything. So I find it like you both a little bit, I feel very uncertain about the context between it. Daniel, anything?
There is a question in the chat,
yes.
Katie. Yeah, so one of the questions that comes up in relation to AI and new graduates is that AI will take over all the entry-level jobs. So what challenges will new grads face as they enter the job market and there's no available jobs because AI took all the entry-level jobs? So what are your thoughts on that topic?
That's a good question. There was, and I read recently that I think by 2027, 70% of the workforce will need to be retrained to some extent based upon the incursion of various functionalities of AI. And we already know that there are certain professions that probably aren't going to have the value in the future that they've had in the past. I know a lot of people use the example of law clerks, where the AI will be able to much more quickly be able to grab all of the cases that relate to certain specific keywords. But I guess the big answer to the question is redefining what entry-level jobs are. As institutions of higher education, we may have to do some rethinking about our priorities as to what we're training our students to do. Although the key things that we do now, which have to do with curiosity, critical thinking, problem solving, these are all things that we as humans can do better than generative AI, because once again, generative AI can't create unique solutions to problems. It can only go back through its database and find solutions that already existed. So the human element, having jobs that involve critical thinking, problem solving, communication, all of those things, that's, I think, our essential responsibility moving forward.
I think that's well put, Andrew. And I will say too that the program that I am in, the adult degree program, effectively exists for more or less for people who feel they've hit a plateau in terms of their career prospects and see a bachelor's degree as a way to kind of level up in their career. So those folks that Andrew's talking about that are going to be in need of reskilling or retraining or some such effort at some point in their life. I interact with folks in that situation very frequently. And, you know, to Andrew's point about law clerks, you know, 50 years ago, it was a very solid middle-class job to be a bank teller. And with the development of automatic teller machines, digital banking, and things like that, those kinds of quote unquote entry-level jobs are just much less lucrative and less available than they were. So things change and you know, prospects for prosperous work shift over time, and I think that's not new. And I am I try to be a little self-critical and a little bit cautious to say, well, because of AI, there will be this sweeping sea change in the economic system of, you know, modern life. It's possible, but I think that that's yet to be seen. But certainly we can look back and see lots of different ways that technology has disrupted lots of industries with intended and unintended consequences. I saw, just as Andrew was talking, a question came through the chat about what our institutions are offering in terms of upskilling. So the unit that I work in, School of Professional and Continuing Education, we have youth programs, we have a bachelor's degree program, we have professional development programs, and we have a lifelong learning program. So we really focus on youth to old age learning spectrum. And part of our professional development portfolio, we're building out micro-credentialing and certificate programs all the time to enable people to make those necessary shifts and changes through their career as their field grows and adapts and evolves. So I'm proud. I'm not personally involved in those efforts, but I'm proud to be in a unit that is, and I think that's really useful and helpful and will meet a demand that's growing. I think there's also a sub-layer about what it means to have meaningful work, and what that will look like and how that will change over time, and how individuals who, we should be very conscious of this in higher education about maintaining the bachelor's degree in particular as a key step into the middle class for folks who are in the working class, or to maintain prosperity through an economic lens. But what about work makes it meaningful to the individual? Is it economic stability? Is it sense of purpose and passion? Is it something else? It could be all both of those and many more. So I don't think it's unidimensional in that way, in terms of like, I just need to find a job with a paycheck that's entry level so I can build and build, but it has to be something that also carries with it some sense of purpose and meaning. And how artificial intelligence will influence that process is a secondary but equally important question to the economic disruption that's possible.
Yeah, and I think those are all excellent points and considerations. And I saw in the chat, a couple of people mentioned this idea that it's not AI taking away these jobs, it's that the people that will get these jobs are the people who understand how to harness AI to do that job more effectively, more purposefully. And potentially, if AI is taking away some of these tedious, as in like repetitive, mindless tasks, then maybe those initial jobs are even more fulfilling, like feel like they're getting you closer to that level of employment more quickly, to Daniel's point. But it does seem to me, I mean, I'm taking us a little bit off topic here, but if it really is about understanding how to harness AI in the workplace, it does feel like that then needs to find its way into the curriculum, right? Like we need to adjust our programs so that they're teaching that to students. And I think Kevin Kelly in the chat has posted a couple of resources that talk about that, but I don't know, we're going to run out of time, but are you guys thinking about that? Andrew and Daniel, are you incorporating how to use AI in the workforce as part of how you think about teaching students?
Well, I mean, that's going to be essential, obviously. Yeah. If you think about, and I want to go back 50 years for a minute, or maybe 60 years. Back at the beginning of this generative AI boom, people were reposting a photograph from 1966 that talked about, that had a bunch of mostly men in white button-down short-sleeve shirts, who were, I guess, math professors who were basically decrying the use of the calculator and how it was going to be a terrible, awful thing. But bringing that forward, that gave us an opportunity, and that gave us an opportunity to get past some of the basic math calculation things that tripped a lot of people up, and move them beyond that to what the math means and what they can do with it and how they can harness it. Same thing happens here. We have the ability to really harness AI so that, and again, this goes back to the type of drudge work, but at this point, if in a given situation, we spend a long, long time doing a research paper, trying to find resources that are going to be essential. Might it not be better if we were able to use generative artificial intelligence when it gets to the point that it doesn't make up citations, to actually get citations for us that we can then, and our students can then spend a lot more time synthesizing the information from those various sources, and then being able to take that a step further. And so no longer, and I know literature reviews are fun, but they're also difficult. And the reason to do a literature review is to get past the literature review, to take and synthesize that information so that you can go somewhere else with it, apply it to a specific context. And if we can spend more time doing that piece, which is the critical thinking piece, which is the synthesis of learning piece, as opposed to the fetching of resource piece, I think we'll be able to help our students to learn more completely.
Yeah, right, that it could be used for good. Well, I want to move on to the next question, and I think there's a way to incorporate. We did have a question posted in the Q&A about not, I'm hoping I get this right, not just the implications that AI could elicit plagiarism or cheating, but that the fact that that is possible, is that taking away from trust and connection and belonging in the classroom. So that's one sort of side of the coin, but then the other, which, we've talked a lot about this, the dangers of AI and some of the things it could take away. What are ways that you foresee AI actually helping enhance connection and sense of belonging, in particular in the learning context? And we took generative out of this question so that we could talk a little bit more broadly, but of course, feel free to incorporate that as well. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, to the point about plagiarism, I'm not totally convinced that there will be a huge boom in plagiaristic activity, because now it's so much easier. I think there is a percentage of people who will see that as a perfectly reasonable thing to do in some situations, and will still do it, and will have to be diligent to manage that. I don't know that the ease of the possibility will instigate a sharp rise, because I think in my general experience, most students are fairly honest and want to get something out of the experience. And so I don't know. I could be totally wrong about that, but I think when it does happen, it'll be harder to find and easier for students who are interested in doing it to do. So I'll just have that to say. In terms of ways to enhance the human connection, I think one of the major benefits that we already see is that AI doesn't have the limitations that a human being does. It's never impatient. It's not going to be upset with you for calling at 3 a.m. It's not going to, like, those things, those kinds of inherent limitations to the human condition won't exist. So, I'm kind of imagining in my mind an extreme possibility, but, to the point about maybe using AI to facilitate better mental health care. If someone's in crisis and a human being just isn't physically accessible, and there is an AI program that is, then I think that's a benefit. I think you can sidestep that barrier to isolation and limitation and that sort of thing. So I think that's something that's possible. Like thinking about students who might have questions in kind of the typical chatbot situations or whatever, when no one is logged online to their community or whatever, they can have this interaction. Or, they don't necessarily need to speak to a human and all the things that come along with it to have certain questions answered. So maybe there's possibilities there. I try to stay away from a doom and gloom kind of scenario. So that I think there are possibilities. I think we should carry heavy skepticism about the ways in which we incorporate AI and not take a deterministic point of view in that, this is just, it's like a comet rushing at the atmosphere or something like that. I think we have lots more agency and control as individuals and institutions than maybe it feels like with a lot of the rhetoric that surrounds AI. So yeah, I think there are probably some ways to enhance the human experience, at least, if not the human connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Andrew, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. Two things. One on the academic integrity piece is I think it was Tracy in the chat mentioned about the value of assignments. And I think that if we create and students perceive assignments to have value to our education in a context that they see as meaningful, they're going to be less likely to use AI to answer the question because it has meaning. But in situations where they see assignments, and sometimes there are assignments that are more about checking boxes, they're going to be more likely to take the easy way out. But I want to spend a little more time talking about the human connection and AI for a minute, because, and I know, Katie, we've been talking about the fact that in our inscribed Tiger to Tiger community, which is a community that our students use just to have conversations with one another about topics of interest, things that are happening in their courses, things that are happening outside their courses that have to do with their university life. And, we talked about what it would mean to have something like a chat bot in that context. And that, here we go back to the point about if a chat bot was in there, we would have to announce that it was a chat bot. However, I'm kind of leery of even going in that direction, because what'll happen is a chat bot will answer somebody's question. Then you may think, wow, cool, someone does that. However, it also stops any conversation from taking place from that point forward. Right. And so it gives one perspective, one point of view, one answer that could have been a much richer conversation that could have taken place. And so when I think about what we can do with AI in terms of that type of community, is to maybe have it more in the background, where it can sort of look at keywords taking place in various conversations and connect students who are having different conversations but about the same things, and sort of push or nudge messages to students that might be interested in having conversations based upon the fact that they've expressed that interest before in the community. So more as a way to try to join people together rather than to try to answer questions that might actually be better answered by people providing richer answers.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you said, I hadn't really thought of that, but that's such a good point, that when technology answers, to your point, like it feels like the conversation's done. Like it doesn't seem to invite the next person to jump in and join that. So it sort of shuts down the interaction. The other thing that I would just add to that, which is a little off topic for this question, but is I think we forget that conversations that take place either face-to-face or in virtual environments are bi-directional. And we tend to think of the benefit always going to the person who asked the question and is getting the answer or getting the advice. But we shouldn't forget about the tremendous benefit that is given to the person who actually does the answering. Like, think how good it feels when you can jump in and support somebody, or, give them an answer that helps them get unstuck. There's a lot of value there too. And when we limit the interaction to just human to computer, you remove that whole side of the coin and the benefits that come from that bi-directional standpoint. I was one other thing I was gonna. Oh,
Katie,
sorry.
there's a question in the chat. So how can we encourage AI developers to increase incorporating work produced by people from non-dominant cultures? So the chat bot outputs represents everyone, not just white males.
And how do we influence
The
the
AI
creators of
developers.
generative AI to be more
Yes.
inclusive in their model? I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. Although society, I assume, will start to push in that direction, right? If the people who are using the content are asking for it, would it not drive that behavior?
I'll just take a little bit of a skeptic's lens. I heard a recent quote in a not very good movie, but the quote was good. It makes money, it makes sense. And I think that will ultimately be what drives further development. And I know for ChatGPT, they're a nonprofit, but they have this huge commercial wing. And, I think money, finding ways to fund that kind of research that has a more, dare I say, humanistic and kind of moral ethical lens than strictly robust technological point of view. I think that's what
Supply and demand.
Yeah.
But do you have a different opinion, Andrew?
Well, it's not so much different opinion. It's my understanding of AI, the technical part, which is really a very limited understanding, is that basically it's ingesting all the data that's being inputted and regurgitating back things that rise to the top. And so if it's getting more input from dominant cultures and dominant populations, that's what it's going to output, unless, of course, the people that are working with AI and start programming it and start weighing things a little bit differently. But I have no idea how that could be accomplished.
Right. It's about the prevalence maybe of the content that's available to it, which can be influenced, but to your point, I mean, there needs to be a motivation to do that.
I see a couple of things in the chat about regulation. I also think that'd be a great idea, and I find it fascinating that the CEO of ChatGPT has explicitly called for intervention and regulation.
I was just reading the chat. Sorry, I got a little distracted by that. So yeah, I will just touch one more thing on here too, which I agree with part of what you said, Andrew. In our work, what we're really interested in right now is that AI is really good at understanding categorization and connection, and humans aren't always as good at that. And so if we can use AI behind the scenes to say, all right, well, we have 200 or 2,000 or 20,000 people in this community, and we can tell that these two people seem to be talking about the same thing, are interested in the same stuff. Maybe it would be great for them to meet each other. We can actually drive the development of connection and social capital faster for people in the community by having the technology support that. So that's kind of where our brains are going with this, which I think is we obviously have talked a little bit about that as well, Andrew. So I know we only have a couple minutes. We have touched on this, I would say, a fair bit in this session. So, this idea that AI is sort of frictionless, that it never gets annoyed with you. You don't necessarily have to be embarrassed about what you say to it. But that's kind of the easy path. And when you're talking to another human, although it might be a little bit harder, there's some benefits that come back from that. Like, how do we strike that balance? And what advice would you have for maybe myself as somebody who owns a tech company, or other people at institutions who are thinking about incorporating these technologies? How do you balance those things to make sure that you're serving the right students in the right way? Who wants to jump in?
I'll start with another quote from that Sherry Turkle article, in which he says that we use conversation with others to learn to converse with ourselves. So our flight from conversation can mean diminished chances to learn skills of self-reflection.
Oh.
And so, if we're looking at our main learning is our business, right? And so we want to have processes that promote learning. And I'll pop that quote when Dan's talking in a minute. I'll pop that quote into the chat. And so the danger of frictionless interaction. And we actually see that. We see examples of that every day in real life in terms of things like Twitter and politics and whatever. We are in, the danger is that we're in an echo chamber. And all we're hearing is what's already been said and the majority opinions. And so we're not getting interesting conversations that take us in directions that we may not have thought of going. Because it's more, we're moving more transactional as opposed to, I think for me, what potentially, eventually curiosity gets lost because we're always getting the same answers to the same question.
You want to add something? I thought there was a really good comment in the chat from Patricia, or Patricia. One of those is going to be right. About how for certain populations, the interaction with the AI, because it, in theory, is not biased and is not bringing that to the table, allows them to have, freer conversation, to not have to deal with maybe the bias or the microaggressions that come from human to human contact. And so, like, maybe the use of the word better here is not always applicable. And there are certainly, and I think that speaks to the previous question about when AI can actually improve connection and belonging. If you're able to have a free conversation with something, even though it's technology, and get honest answers and feedback, that might make you feel more at ease and more at home than if you had to have that conversation directly with a human. Sorry, so Daniel, I think I jumped on your.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. I'll try to keep it brief because I know we're near time, but I think that intentionality is what matters more than anything. I think as teachers and educators, we have to infuse friction back into the system. And, we can we use many metaphors for, I'm thinking about, something like exercise and resistance training. Like, if you do not have the friction of lifting heavy things, your muscles just don't stay strong. And because it's hard, it makes you strong. And we have to be very careful to ensure that students understand that a frictionless interaction with an AI system is not the same thing as thinking. And it is not the same thing as thinking hard or critically. So there have to be moments where that's peppered back in, and that the usefulness of any tool that we've talked about today is not lumped in with all the vast array of technological apparatus that can steal your attention unless you're intentionally resisting it and adding that friction yourself. I'm thinking about the great book by Matthew Crawford, The World Beyond Your Head, about the attention economy, and how so much technology exists in a certain way outwardly to enhance your life, but what ultimately happens is that it steals your attention. So things like what Andrew was definitely mentioning about reflection and thinking and intention get ravaged rather than enhanced. So doing the things that are harder but maybe more important, that aren't being that are being outsourced to the technology, you're less able to do it because that frictionlessness has made your capacity weaker.
Yeah, and I think that's a great closing thought. At the end, we're not going to solve all the problems and questions here, but it definitely seems like there's a balance between opportunity and challenge, and just being mindful and intentional to the points that you guys made, I think is really valuable. I'll just say quickly, Andrew referenced at some point in our conversation the Tiger to Tiger community that he's built at Fort Hays State University. We did create a case study about that. So if you're interested in it, you can scan the QR code. We'll also send that link out in our follow-up so you have access to it. Oh, and Danielle's gonna put it in this chat. But big thank you to Andrew and Daniel for coming and sharing your perspectives today. This is obviously a very complicated topic and one that we will probably talk about again repeatedly. And big appreciation for the audience and all your great participation in the chat. We'd love to stay in touch with you guys and continue the conversation. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out. And everybody have a great afternoon.